The scent of baking cornbread and slow-simmered collard greens was the first thing I knew in the morning, and the last thing I smelled at night. It was the perfume of my life, the aroma of 12 years of sweat, tears, and unwavering dedication. McKay's Southern Kitchen wasn't just my family's restaurant. It was the world I had built, one perfected recipe and one nurtured customer relationship at a time. From now on, this place is mine. And frankly, this business needs real leadership, not emotional women trying to play boss. Mason's voice, sharp and cold as a freshly honed boning knife, cut through the stunned silence of the morning staff meeting. His chest was puffed out, a caricature of authority he'd never earned. I sat there, frozen in my usual chair at the head of the large, scarred oak table we used for meetings, watching my brother deliver his first speech as the new owner of McKay's Southern Kitchen. The restaurant I had poured my entire adult life into. The life that was just erased in a single, dismissive sentence. My name is Sabrina McKay. I'm 36 years old. And until that moment, I thought I understood what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. The sting of his words wasn't just about gender. It was a deliberate, calculated erasure of everything I was, everything I'd done. It was about nullifying every late night I'd spent perfecting our signature dishes, every frantic weekend I'd managed a staffing crisis, every financial precipice I'd navigated while he was out charming investors and taking credit for my grit. I looked around the table at the faces of the people who were more my family than my actual blood relatives. Jennifer, our head server, a woman whose children I'd watched grow up, stared intently at her own hands, her knuckles white. Carlos, our brilliant line cook who I'd trained from a nervous teenager into a culinary artist, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze fixed on a crack in the worn wooden floor. Even sweet Bethany from the pastry station, who saw the good in everyone, looked like she wanted to disappear into the flour-dusted apron she wore. They all knew. They knew who really ran this place. They knew who created the bourbon peach cobbler that had food bloggers driving from Atlanta just for a taste. They knew who balanced the books until midnight and who managed the suppliers with a firm but fair hand. They knew who had held the restaurant together through 2 recessions and my father's health scares. Mason asked, a smug smile plastered on his face. Any questions? The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could feel every eye in the room on me, waiting, expecting me to fight back, to scream, to defend the territory I had bled for. They were waiting for the emotional woman to have an outburst. Instead, I stood up slowly, the scrape of my chair against the worn floor the only sound in the room. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs, but my face was a mask of placid calm. I looked directly at Mason, my voice steady, devoid of the inferno raging inside me. Congratulations on your promotion, Mason. The words carried no sarcasm, no anger, just a chilling, professional finality. I saw his smug smile falter, just for a second, as if he'd been expecting a different, more satisfying response. He wanted a fight. I wouldn't give him one. I walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the sudden, cavernous quiet. Behind me, I heard Mason clear his throat, trying to regain his momentum. Well then, let's talk about the changes we'll be implementing immediately. But I was already gone. I pushed through the swinging kitchen doors one last time. The familiar, comforting smells of cornbread and collard greens, the scents that had once felt like home, now seemed like ghosts of what used to be. I grabbed my purse from the office, my former office, and walked out the back door, without looking back. The humid Charleston morning air hit my face, a warm and sticky blanket even at 9 a.m. I sat in my car for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. Mason thought he'd won something today. He thought he'd finally put me in my place, claimed what he believed was rightfully his as the eldest and only son. What he didn't realize was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had just set me free. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd been avoiding for weeks, a name filed under a fantasy I never thought I'd act on. Hello, Mr. Patterson. It's Sabrina McKay. I'm ready to sign that lease. Growing up in the McKay family meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. My father, Thomas McKay, was a titan in my eyes. He'd built our restaurant from nothing in 1987, transforming a tired, greasy spoon diner into Charleston's beloved McKay's Southern Kitchen. He was a man of tradition, of hard work, and of deeply ingrained patriarchal values. My mother, Patricia, worked tirelessly beside him for 30 years, managing front-of-house operations with a grace and warmth that kept customers returning, generation after generation. She was the heart of the restaurant, while my father was its unyielding backbone. And then there was Mason. 3 years older and the only son, he was always positioned as the heir apparent. The dynamic was set in stone from our childhood. Even as children, he got the choice cuts of meat at dinner while I helped clear plates. When we both started working at the restaurant as teenagers, he was introduced to customers as the future owner, while I was simply Thomas's daughter who helps out. But helping out became my life's work. After college, while Mason bounced between half-hearted sales jobs and entrepreneurial ventures that never quite took off, I moved back home and threw myself into the restaurant. I wasn't officially management on paper, but somehow, every crisis landed on my desk. I spent 5 years learning every single aspect of the business, from the dish pit to the profit and loss statements. I modernized our ancient inventory system, I negotiated better contracts with local farmers, and I created 3 of our most popular menu items, including the bourbon peach cobbler that food bloggers raved about. I worked 60-hour weeks without complaint, skipping family vacations and social events because someone needed to mind the restaurant. Mason, meanwhile, had discovered his talent for schmoozing. He'd breeze in during busy Friday nights, work the dining room like a seasoned politician, and leave with a pocketful of phone numbers from potential investors or local business owners. Our parents loved watching him network, convinced his charm would take the restaurant to the next level. "Sabrina's the detail person," my mother would say fondly, a phrase that always felt like a pat on the head. But Mason has vision. The irony wasn't lost on me. My vision had increased our revenue by 30% over 3 years. My details kept us profitable when other family restaurants in the area were closing their doors. But Mason's charisma, his easy smile and confident swagger, made him the natural choice for leadership in our parents' eyes. 2 months ago, when Dad announced his retirement plans, I'd foolishly, naively hoped. I hoped that my years of dedication, my tangible results, would finally be recognized. Instead, he called a family meeting to discuss transitioning ownership to Mason. I sat there, watching my brother nod seriously, as if he'd been preparing for this moment his entire life rather than showing up sporadically to glad-hand customers and reap the rewards of my labor. "You'll be invaluable support for him, Sabrina," Dad had assured me, his words a clumsy attempt to soften a blow that felt like a physical assault. Every good leader needs a strong right hand. A right hand. After 12 years of being the backbone, I was being offered a supporting role in my own story. I smiled and nodded then, just as I had smiled and nodded today. But that night, I started making phone calls. If they wanted Mason to lead, he could learn to do it without me. The morning of Mason's official takeover, I arrived at the restaurant 2 hours early, just like always. The prep work still needed doing, the books still required balancing, and somebody had to ensure we had enough supplies for the lunch rush. I'd been McKay's Southern Kitchen's unofficial operations manager for so long that the routine was embedded in my muscle memory. I was reviewing vendor invoices when Jennifer arrived for her shift. "Morning, Sabrina. Big day today, huh?" She tried to sound upbeat, but I caught the note of uncertainty in her voice. The whole staff had been walking on eggshells since the ownership announcement, unsure how things would change under Mason's leadership. "Just another day," I replied, not looking up from the paperwork. But it wasn't just another day, and we both knew it. Today would mark the beginning of something entirely different, though Mason had no idea just how different it would be. The storefront on King Street was exactly as I remembered it from my fantasy-fueled visit 3 weeks prior, rough around the edges, but full of potential. The The previous tenant had been a high-end boutique that never quite found its audience, leaving behind elegant lighting fixtures and a half-finished kitchen that could be modified for a smaller, more intimate operation. "What kind of timeline are you thinking?" Mr. Patterson, the property owner, had asked as we walked through the dusty space. I thought about all the regulatory hurdles I'd navigated for McKay's over the years, all the health department inspections I'd managed, all the vendor relationships I'd cultivated. "I can handle it," I'd said with a confidence that surprised even me. We spent the next hour discussing lease terms and renovation requirements. The rent was higher than I'd hoped, but manageable if I kept overhead low initially. I'd have to be chef, manager, and marketing department all in one, at least until revenue could support additional staff. Walking back to my car, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I was about to bet everything on my belief that customers would follow quality food and genuine hospitality, regardless of the McKay family name. It was the biggest risk I'd ever taken, but it felt more honest than staying to watch Mason destroy what I'd spent 12 years building. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Are you okay? Mason's asking where you went." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I'm fine. Take care of yourself." The next 2 hours were a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Lease agreements, insurance applications, contractor estimates for kitchen modifications. I called every vendor I'd worked with at McKay's, carefully explaining that I was starting a new venture and asking about their standard terms for new accounts. Most were surprised but supportive, especially Tony from Coastal Produce, who'd been delivering to our family restaurant since I was in high school. "About time you went out on your own," he said. "You've been running that place for years anyway." By the time I drove home that evening, I had a signed lease, 3 contractor estimates, and a business license application ready to submit. I also had a knot in my stomach the size of a dinner plate, and the growing realization that I had just made a decision I couldn't undo. I poured myself a large glass of wine and sat on my front porch, watching the Charleston evening settle over the historic district. Tomorrow, Mason would start learning what it actually took to run a restaurant. And I would start proving that talent and dedication mattered more than family connections and entitled attitudes. The second week of Mason's reign at McKay's Southern Kitchen brought the first crisis. I heard about it through Bethany, who called me 3 days after I'd submitted my business license application. "Sabrina, I hope it's okay that I'm calling," she said, her voice nervous. "But we're having some problems at the restaurant, and I didn't know who else to ask." "What kind of problems?" I kept my tone neutral, though my pulse quickened. "Well, Mason changed our suppliers without checking the quality first. The cornbread yesterday was terrible. The cornmeal was too coarse, and it fell apart. We had 12 customers complain. And the greens aren't cooking right because he switched to cheaper ham hocks that don't have enough fat." I closed my eyes, picturing the disaster. Our cornbread recipe was legendary in Charleston, passed down from my grandmother and perfected through decades of trial and error. The specific cornmeal blend came from a small, family-owned mill in South Carolina that cost more than generic brands but produced the silky, moist texture our customers expected. "What did he say when you brought it up?" "He told me to stop questioning his decisions and figure out how to make it work." Jennifer tried to explain that customers were asking for their money back, but he said people complain about everything and we shouldn't cater to whiners. My stomach clenched. Those whiners were loyal customers who'd been eating our cornbread for years. They knew the difference between the real thing and a cheap substitute. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," I said carefully. "But Mason's in charge now. He'll have to learn through experience." "That's just it," Bethany continued, her voice dropping. "I don't think he wants to learn. He keeps saying the old ways were inefficient and that customers won't notice small changes if we market properly. Yesterday, he hired some marketing consultant who wants to rebrand us as upscale casual and add items like quinoa salads to the menu." Quinoa salads. At a traditional Southern restaurant that built its reputation on authentic comfort food. I had to admire Mason's ability to miss the point so completely. "Bethany, can I ask you something? Are you happy working there?" The pause on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. "I love cooking," she said finally. "And I love the regulars who've become like family. But it's getting hard to take pride in what we're serving when Mason won't listen to anyone who's actually worked in the kitchen." "I understand," I said. "And if you ever want to talk about other opportunities, I'm always here." After we hung up, I sat staring at my laptop screen, where I'd been working on menu concepts for my new restaurant, McKay's Table. I'd planned to start small and simple, focusing on a few signature dishes done exceptionally well. But if Mason was already alienating customers and staff, maybe I could move faster than I'd originally planned. I called Carlos next, then Jennifer. Both conversations followed the same pattern: frustration with Mason's changes, concern about declining food quality, and careful questions about what I was planning for my new venture. I didn't recruit anyone directly, but I made it clear that talented people would always have a place with me. By the end of the week, I had 3 staff members asking detailed questions about my timeline. More importantly, I had a clear picture of how quickly McKay's Southern Kitchen was losing its way under Mason's leadership. He was changing everything that made us special, while ignoring the operational expertise that kept us running smoothly. It was exactly the opening I needed. Though I felt a pang of sadness watching my family's restaurant stumble, this wasn't how I'd wanted things to go. But Mason had chosen his path when he dismissed my contributions so callously. Now I would show him what real leadership looked like. 3 weeks into my new venture, I received a call that changed everything. I was standing in my future restaurant, watching contractors install new equipment, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Miss McKay? This is Dr. Patricia Hendricks from the Charleston Food Network Association. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." The Charleston Food Network Association was a prestigious group of local chefs, restaurateurs, and food writers who promoted the city's culinary scene. Getting their attention usually took years of established success. "Not at all, Dr. Hendricks. How can I help you?" "I've been hearing some interesting things about your new restaurant project. Word travels fast in our community, especially when someone with your reputation decides to strike out on their own." "My reputation?" I'd never thought of myself as having a reputation beyond the walls of McKay's Southern Kitchen, but Charleston's food scene was smaller and more interconnected than I'd realized. "Several of our members have mentioned their experiences at McKay's over the years," she continued. "Consistently, they've noted the exceptional quality of certain dishes and the operational excellence that kept the restaurant running smoothly. Many assumed you were the executive chef, given the caliber of the food." "I was the operations manager," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I did develop several menu items and oversee quality control." "Ah, that explains a lot. The reason I'm calling is that we have an opening in our autumn showcase event. It's typically reserved for established restaurants, but we occasionally invite promising new ventures to participate. Would you be interested in representing your new establishment?" My heart hammered against my ribs. The Autumn Showcase was Charleston's premier food event, attended by food critics, tourism officials, and culinary enthusiasts from across the Southeast. Restaurants that participated often saw their reservations book solid for months afterward. "I'd be honored," I managed. "But I should mention that we're still in the build-out phase. We haven't even had our soft opening yet." "When are you planning to open?" I did quick mental calculations. The contractors promised to finish kitchen installations by the following week. I'd need at least 2 weeks for staff training and recipe testing. 6 weeks from now, if everything goes according to schedule. Perfect. The showcase is 8 weeks out, which gives you time to work out any opening issues. I'll email you the details and vendor information. After she hung up, I stood in my empty dining room, barely believing what had just happened. Someone had recommended me for Charleston's most important food event, based solely on my work at McKay's. Someone had noticed that the quality they associated with our family restaurant came from my efforts, not Mason's charm. I called my contractor immediately. "Jerry, what would it take to move our timeline up by a week?" "Possible, but it'll cost extra for overtime crews." "Why the rush?" "I just got invited to participate in the Charleston Food Network's Autumn Showcase." This could make or break the entire venture. In that case, let's make it happen. When do you need to be serving customers? 5 weeks from today. Jerry whistled low. You're cutting it close, but I like your confidence. Let me make some calls. As I drove home that evening, I realized that everything was accelerating beyond my original plans. I'd hoped to build slowly, establish a local following, and gradually grow the business. Instead, I was about to launch directly into Charleston's culinary spotlight. But maybe that was exactly what I needed. Mason had dismissed me as an emotional woman playing boss. In 5 weeks, I'd be serving food to some of the most discerning palates in the Southeast, representing everything I'd learned about hospitality and excellence over 12 years. Let him try to explain that away to our parents. McKay's table opened on a humid Thursday morning in October with no fanfare and no advertising budget. I'd chosen the name carefully, keeping the family connection while making it clear this was my establishment. The soft opening was intentionally quiet, just a few dozen customers who'd heard through word of mouth. Jennifer, Carlos, and Bethany had all given their notice at McKay's Southern Kitchen the previous week, timing their departures to coincide with my opening. I hadn't asked them to leave their jobs, but I'd made it clear that talented people would always have opportunities with me. They'd made their own decisions about where they wanted to build their careers. Our first customer was Mrs. Eleanor Davidson, an 82-year-old widow who'd been eating lunch at McKay's Southern Kitchen every Tuesday for 15 years. She'd heard about my new place through Jennifer and wanted to see if I'd maintained the quality she remembered. "Honey, I sure have missed your cornbread," she said, settling into one of our mismatched, charmingly vintage chairs. "That new boy at your daddy's place just doesn't understand what makes food special." I served her our signature dish, pan-fried chicken with a bourbon glaze, accompanied by cornbread made from the same mill I'd used for years, and greens slow-cooked with proper country ham. Her face lit up with the first bite. "This is it," she declared. "This is what I've been missing." Word spread through Charleston's network of food lovers faster than I dared hope. By Friday evening, we had a waiting list. By the following Tuesday, Mrs. Davidson had brought 3 friends. Carlos reported that customers were asking specifically for dishes I created at McKay's: the bourbon peach cobbler, the honey-glazed carrots, the cornbread that had become legendary among locals. "They keep saying the food tastes different at the old place," Jennifer told me during our Friday lunch rush. "Less soul, more corporate." I nodded but didn't respond. I wasn't interested in bad-mouthing Mason or the family restaurant. I was focused on building something positive, something that honored the traditions I'd learned while showcasing my own vision for Southern hospitality. The Charleston Food Network's Autumn Showcase arrived like a hurricane of opportunity and terror. I'd spent 2 weeks perfecting my presentation menu, choosing dishes that represented both traditional Southern cooking and my own innovations. The bourbon peach cobbler would be my signature dessert, alongside pan-fried chicken with a honey bourbon glaze and my grandmother's cornbread recipe with a modern twist, butter infused with local honey. The event was held at the historic Market Hall, with 24 restaurants representing the best of Charleston's culinary scene. I'd never participated in anything this large or public, but my staff was ready. Carlos had practiced our chicken preparation until he could execute it perfectly under pressure. Bethany's dessert presentation looked like edible art. Jennifer moved through the crowd with natural grace, explaining our dishes to curious attendees. Dr. Hendricks found me during the evening rush, watching as food critics and local celebrities sampled our offerings. "Miss McKay, I have to tell you, your booth has generated more positive comments than any newcomer in the showcase's history." "Really?" I tried to keep the excitement out of my voice. "The food speaks for itself. But people are also talking about the story. A talented woman leaving the family business to build something of her own resonates with a lot of our community members." As the evening wound down, I looked around at my exhausted but triumphant team. We'd served over 300 people, handed out hundreds of business cards, and booked reservation requests for the next 6 weeks. More importantly, we'd proven that McKay's table belonged in Charleston's top tier of dining establishments. The next morning, I found a review in the Charleston Post and Courier's food section that made my hands shake. McKay's table brings soul back to Southern cuisine, proving that authentic flavors and genuine hospitality never go out of style. Mason called me that afternoon for the first time since I'd left. I let it go to voicemail. As I reflected on my journey, from dismissed sister to independent restaurant owner, I realized that Mason's cruelty had actually been a gift. It forced me to discover my own strength and build something truly mine. The taste of that victory was sweeter than any bourbon peach cobbler I'd ever made.